When you are.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at the Hopenning, the place where hope is happening. We are so happy to share episode number 60 with you during this recording. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm here with my lovely co-host, Fran. Fran is a full-time teacher, and she's been teaching for 34 years. She's up in northern Alberta, Canada, in High Prairie. And she does rapid transformational therapy part-time. And I'm in Calgary, Alberta, and I do rapid transformational therapy and hypnotherapy full time. So we are very honored to have you with us, and Fran will introduce our wonderful guest to you today.
So we were supposed to interview Martin last week, and I had my very last parent-teacher interview. Marina,
You
submitted
did it.
my retirement letter today.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so Martin was, so Martin was so kind to reschedule for us. Thank the good Lord, because Martin is fantastic. Oh, my goodness. Martin is a man on the mend. Martin O'Toole is a recovered, high-functioning alcoholic adman with a tempestuous past life of spilt milk under burnt bridges, his very words. Having been talked out of a suicide attempt by his Beagle, this rock-bottom moment launched Martin on a phenomenal journey of self-healing and personal transformation. Through his intense experiences with depression and pointless pursuance of success, Martin uncovered the alchemy of everlasting happiness, what he calls the anatomy of happy, understanding the depths of depression and contrasting heights of delight. Compelled to share his story, he started the How to Die Happy podcast, and he has just written and published a book by the same name, which I just finished like 3 minutes ago, Martin. I finished your book.
Oh, wow.
It's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. You're coming to us from Bali. So for Marina and me, we are recording this. It's in the evening, 7:30 in Alberta time. And so in Bali, Martin, what time is it for you?
9:30 a.m.
Yeah. How was the night for you, since we're heading that way?
Well, if you get the same night I get, then you'll have a wonderful night's sleep, like the dead.
Frogs croaking.
Well, we have a few less frogs now because the rainy season is ending. Although we didn't have rain last night, but so the pond we have in the garden, we don't keep it fully stocked. We just let it fill during the rainy season. And it's an interesting thing, isn't it, when you watch nature, a completely dry pond starts to fill, and then very quickly you've got pond skaters on the top of the water. Where do they come from? And then various species of toads and frogs appear. So at the height of the rainy season, there's a chorus, like a real, I want to call it a symphony, but it's not really that tuneful, and it keeps you. You have to use earplugs if you want to sleep through it at night. But anyway, last night, not many reptiles, and I slept like the dead. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, Martin, you weren't always in Bali, and but that was where you continued your personal transformation to get where you are today. But you've had, as we talked earlier, you and I, you've lived 10 lives practically, right? You've lived the lives of 10. It's quite the journey you've had. So Martin, can you give us, I know it's going to be hard to make it brief, but give us an idea of where you came from. What was your past like?
Sure. Excuse me. Yeah, well, I'm from the UK originally, and I grew up in a traumatic household. My mum was an alcoholic and had been ever since I was born. So myself and my two brothers, my older brother was 8 years my senior. We grew up in this very strange environment where there was a lot of crashing, bashing, shouting, frightening behavior. Frightening as in behavior that you couldn't rationalize and certainly couldn't plan for. And there was also an awful lot of neglect and a lot of solitude. And as a result, I normalized it, because we do, don't we? And if we want to survive, we don't just normalize it. We create coping mechanisms to deal with that sort of behavior, surviving really that sort of environment. And so I went on through my life. I left home when I was 17. I didn't fall out with my parents, but I had a poor relationship, especially with my mum, because she was a constant alcoholic, and I tried as best I could. I would reappear at home on Mother's Day with flowers and things, to hang out with my parents, but she'd still be drunk from the night before. And that got to the point where I stopped trying sometime in my adulthood, because I couldn't handle the disappointment anymore, I think. So I went off and started a very successful career in advertising, and little did I realize, became an alcoholic, and a high functioning one at that. And also I was using cocaine and smoking. As it transpired later, I had a sex addiction as well. So all that to say, because I'd normalized this bizarre environment from childhood, I didn't see the problems that I had, and there were many. There were all manner of mental health issues: narcissism, depression, gaslighting, mistreating women, especially, not physically but mentally. And I turned into a serial philanderer and cheat, and I say a gaslighter. And I would fall out with people all the time. I had, on the one hand, the ability to make friends. I was very social, and a lot of people would call me extrovert. In fact, I thought I was extrovert. It's only when I got sober and did the healing that I realized actually I was an introvert extrovert. I didn't actually really want to be that person at the center of the of attention and the the life and the soul of the party. In fact, I very much enjoy peace and quiet these days, and don't really go to an awful lot of social events. All that to say that I got to the point where in 2014 my mum died, and that created something I never anticipated, which was this sort of big fracture in what was already a very broken mind and a closed heart. But actually, as I say in my book, when people die, it can actually be the best thing that ever happens to you. And in my case, that was exactly what occurred. When my mum died, I cheated on my partner at the time. It was a dalliance, digital dalliance, flirtation with a total stranger, even though this woman was actually trying to help me as best she could. But she has a very complex character, and it was very difficult. She was younger than me. It was very difficult for her to work out how to help. So, and she left, and I got to the point where, through the grief, I was drinking heavily still, using an awful lot of cocaine. I ended up loading a shotgun, pointing it to my head, and came moments away from killing myself. It was actually my Beagle that talked me out of it. Macy the Beagle. She features in the book. There's a chapter called "Last Night a Beagle Saved My Life." And for anybody who's old enough to remember disco, you'll you'll know the musical reference there. So that was the very beginning of a long process of self-realization, of individuation, as Jung would call it. And not that I was ready at that point. I started therapy. I moved to London and continued with the high functioning behavior and the drama and all the trauma that went with the drinking and the drugs and the lifestyle. But then I think it was early 2018, I had a really bad accident on a very, very drunk night, and I tore the meniscus in my knee. And that was the moment where I realized I'd hit rock bottom, and I had to accept I was an alcoholic, and I had to stop. Otherwise, I was going to kill myself. And then this incredible journey began, which was sobriety for a year, and then realizing actually I didn't like my life. I didn't like owning an advertising agency. I didn't like living in London. Didn't like hanging around with a lot of people, the people that I was with, because really we were just all disco friends. And then I went off and did this incredible plant medicine called ayahuasca, which is a very potent psychedelic medicine used in South America. And it's safe to say that I found God. But let's not get lost in the word God per se. And that was the beginning of a total change. So I sold everything. I gave everything that I owned away. And just with 2 bags and 1 Beagle, I flew to Bali. Changed my environment, spent a year doing the work, mindfulness practices, meditation, yoga, silent retreats, off to South America to work with more plant medicines, and it completely and utterly changed my life. And along the way, discovered this thing I write about and called the anatomy of happy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 47 years condensed into 5 minutes.
Not even. 3.5.
Good. I'm practicing.
That's such an amazing story, and so much the alchemy, I think, of what life is supposed to be. And so tell us about your book, and you have this podcast, and I absolutely love the name, How to Die Happy. So what is the whole concept about that? Because before our recording, you said it's actually not about dying, it's about living. And I love that.
Well, thanks for asking. Yeah, I suppose having stepped right at the edge of the cliff and almost taken my life at a point where I was so filled with shame and guilt and sadness and regret, and having pulled back from that place where, and anyone listening who has suffered from serious depression or had suicidal thoughts, they will know it's very difficult to pull back. It's almost impossible to pull back because you get lost in this swirling vortex of your own unhappy thoughts, and you get to the point where you can't actually reach out to anyone. So you're the only person therapizing you is you, but you're mentally ill. So that's kind of a bad idea, right? So having been to that place and then got to the other end of the spectrum, absolute joy, gratitude for just being alive. I realized that there was a relationship between life and death that many of us in the West do not see or do not want to see, because we push death away. We hide it under rugs. As parents, we don't expose children to it. The kids don't want to. The kids often might not come and see Gran if she's dying, or Graham if he's in the hospice, and they might not even go to funerals, because we think we're protecting our children from something, from trauma, perhaps. But actually, we're protecting them from the reality. We're protecting them from the inevitable truth that everyone we know is going to die. So this got me thinking about the podcast and the book, because they were sort of running in parallel. How can we reframe our relationship with death so that we can fully embrace what it is, and therefore unpeel the onion of life, if you like? Because I certainly feel that a great many of the human beings on this planet are actually moving further away from self, spirit, God, spirituality, divinity, whatever you want, whatever your word is, depending on your religion and your metaphysical belief. And I think we're being encouraged to be distracted, by these. and everywhere we go, there's another opportunity to be distracted or to consume. And a lot of these things we consume are doing things to our body, to our physiology, that actually make us more anxious, more tired, less healthy, less fit, less able to center, less able to focus, less able to ground. And that's really where the idea came from. So the premise of the whole thing is to ask, if you had 5 minutes left to live, what would be on your list of regrets? And I left a pause there moment deliberately, just so people could actually think about it. When is the last time you did actually write a list of the things that you wish you hadn't said or done, or that you had said or done? And then when we dive a little deeper, what does that do to our relationship? What does that say about our relationship with us? But what does it also say about our relationship with everyone else in our lives? Our parents, our children, our family, our friends, co-workers, could be whoever it is. Do we genuinely feel as though we have an authentic, loving, open relationship with ourselves and with everyone around us? Now, 9 out of 10 times, I would say the answer would be no. Actually, I've just done my list of regrets while you've been wittering away, Martin, and oh no, there's quite a lot to deal with, and that's the point. Because the good news is, brilliant. Well, you're not dead, so what's stopping you from addressing these things now? Because I am telling you from firsthand experience that once you get these things, and this is the low-hanging fruit, by the way, once you get this stuff out of the way, you've got a whole new path ahead of you. And your podcast is called Hopenning. I love the wordplay, by the way. This is all about hope. This is all about how to pave the way. And it actually, then it's not even about hope. It's about the reality. Yeah. So we've gone past having faith in the idea of change. We're actually embracing and living and being change. And change is the femoral artery that runs through the book. I'm inviting people to embrace change. They say a leopard never changes its spots, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, this old dog was taught and did teach himself a fair load of new tricks. And now I'm 47 years old, an age where I suspect many people would believe that's it. I can't change anything by that age. Wherever I am, whoever I am, that's me until the day I die. Well, newsflash, not true at all. Every day, every moment of our lives, we can change, but we've got to choose it. And I suppose the point is, what we're not changing, we are also choosing. So choice is the secondary pillar, really, that underpins the How to Die Happy book. It's reminding people of their sovereign power and their ability to change the way they live their lives and change the relationships in which they might suffer, or the workplace in which they might suffer. Change a feeling of feeling entirely unfulfilled in either work or relationships. So it's a deep dive. It's quite a big book. It goes through all sorts of stuff. What I've tried to do is give people a taster, to offer threads for people to pull. This book is I should show the book, but this book is it speaks to anybody wherever they are on their journey. So you might be what you might class as rather enlightened, or you might be on the hamster wheel, very much plugged into the matrix system, with no idea of how to make change. So this book is for everybody, to invite you to consider Eastern philosophies. Although I do quote Jeshua, I do quote the Quran, but I also quote Buddha, I quote the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindus, I quote Confucius, Lao Tzu, the Taoists. So it's really, it's a pan celebration, really, of the wisdom that we can find in ancient philosophies and theosophies and religions. and it's an invitation to start utilizing some practical utilities that are in the book as well. So ultimately, it's curated wisdom. It's my own personal stories, practical, examples of how this stuff can all go wrong and right, and practical utilities. So lots of ways and methods that people can use to unplug from it, even if it's for 60 seconds. That was a long answer to your short question.
Wonderful.
And I live in the north, and it takes a long time for Amazon to get here. So I downloaded it, right, the audible version, and in the audible version, the joy of the audible version is you narrate it, but you can hear in your voice the different inflections. Like, you use metaphors incredibly well. Like, I'm a teacher, so when I hear it's like, oh, that was well done. I love your use of metaphors, and just so many little funny little quips in there. Even though the topic is super serious, you're never going to get a more serious topic than all of the things you went through. And yet there's humor and imagination and metaphor, and it's just really brilliantly written. Like, I applaud that. Well done, Martin. A plus plus plus.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to Fran on email the other day, and she said, "Oh, I'm a teacher," and I said, "Oh, well, I hope I get an A plus." And she said, "You're getting an A plus plus plus."
That's amazing.
You talked about the monkey. So and it's just really cute the way you describe the monkey. And so Marina, then he sends a picture of himself with a monkey. Like, there's seriously a monkey in the picture. And I'm like, that's not real. Like, I'm thinking it's some kind of a Muppet, or, but Martin's got, like, within the book, he talks about a monkey. There we go. Yeah.
That's monkey and me.
It's kind of got a mustache like yours too, Martin.
Well, that was the idea. Yeah. Well, I should probably explain the monkey metaphor for your listeners. And so, yeah, one of the things this book delves into is the understanding of ego and ego's relationship with consciousness, if you like. So, from where I'm sitting, the two things are very, very different. Ego is, well, we all know what ego is, but for your listeners, ego, as I explain in the book, is the monkey that keeps the Earth rover, that's what I call the human body, alive and safe. And it's also, obviously, there are many complex layers to ego, including its super ego, and obviously, if you're talking about Freud, but then, of course, everyone has different perspectives on ego, because Jung would talk about it differently versus Ramdas, who I think does a wonderful job of talking about ego, not in a negative way, because some people do refer to ego as the enemy. And I'm not suggesting that's wrong either, incidentally, because ego can be our enemy if unchecked, which is the fundamental point. But what I had this realization, and the metaphor essentially is one day that it's almost as if my consciousness kind of came to in the back seat of the Earth rover with gaffer tape over my mouth, and my hands were tied, and, sort of slightly startled, I look around, and this is obviously a year and a bit into sobriety, and I've started to do this mindfulness work. And I see the Earth rovers sort of careering around the place, and there's a monkey at the wheel, at the controls, and I saw suddenly crystal clear that the ego had been driving the Earth rover around for 40 odd years. Now, that wouldn't be so much of a problem but monkey doesn't have a driving license, is fairly reckless and impulsive, is always in fight or flight mode, so tends to drive quite fast. And one of Monkey's primary driving instructors was an alcoholic. So you can see how this might cause some problems for the Earth rover. And of course it did. The Earth rover was crashing and banging into all sorts of other Earth rovers. There was the occasional hit and run, metaphorically speaking. We made a mess, Monkey and I. And it took me a long time to realize that I'd allowed this to happen, because Monkey, of course, isn't separate to me. Monkey is me. I am Monkey. So I had to, having had this realization, I had to give Monkey a cuddle, have a good old chat, and essentially suggest that Monkey had a sabbatical in the back seat, still allowed to navigate. You can look over the, you can look over my shoulder, buddy. There's no problem there, but I'm gonna do the steering. And that's the metaphor of Monkey. And I talk about Monkey quite a lot, and I do it with love. I think something we in the self-help space, and I'm not necessarily talking about authors or advisors or therapists or coaches, even writers. I think we often talk about ego in a negative way, and in my book, I'm very keen to avoid doing that, because I think if we're not careful, it just creates further inner conflict. It's just conflict of another form. And of course, if we are to refer to our ego in that way, and to suggest that we ought to kill it, we talk about ego death, then that's just another form of ego. So it's the ongoing battle. So yes, ego and Monkey, they get a good look in. I'm actually writing an article at the moment called Monkey and Me, hence I've got monkeys everywhere here, so I had to go and find a monkey to go and sit on my knee so we could get a photograph, and that'll be in the blog.
Amazing. I have a question about growing up in your pain and seeing life through the lens of pain, seeing your parents, your family, everything in your life through the lens of pain. After your transformation, after the alchemy, how do you see that now?
Well, that's a great question. Very much more with a lot more empathy is the short answer. Of course, you're a hypnotherapist.
Yes.
So I did a hypnotherapy session here in Bali with a very, very wonderful healer called Kartika Alexandra. And this session was very unplanned, because I was writing, I decided I was going to write this book. And so I said to her, look, I'm all healed. I've done the work. This is what we do, isn't it? Especially when we have these revelations and we start to feel a lot better about being alive, suddenly you think, right, that's it. I'm done, fixed. So I'm all healed. But I'd like to do a hypnotherapy session with you, because I'm writing a book. And when I was a kid, I used to live in a haunted house, and it was very haunted. It was quite malevolent. There were all sorts of strange things that happened to everybody in the family. You know, characters standing at the end of the bed, and babies crying, and children tittering, and it wasn't nice. So I said to her, I want you to hypnotize me and take me back to that place so I can see what this creature was that was always looking at my brother and I from this window, because we were both terrorized by this entity, for want of a better word. So she's, quietly said, okay, no problem. Right. And she sat me down and we did the hypnotherapy session, and she took me back to the landing in the house. And actually, I wasn't focused on this window at all. I was immediately focused on, I was aged 5, and I was focused on my mum in her room, drinking, smoking, crying, whispering vitriolic expressions to herself or to something else in the room, tortured. She was tortured by the demon of drink, literally. And I would sit there as a child outside that room, just looking at her through the crack, in the hinge, just watching her, just watching over her, I suppose, and wishing I could do something to help her. But of course, I was only 5, so there's nothing I could do. So that was one realization that occurred. But then through the same session, I was able to talk to 5-year-old Martin, and I was able to explain to 5-year-old Martin that it wasn't his fault. None of this was his fault, and he couldn't do anything other than what he was doing. And then I was able to face age 5-year-old Martin was able to face my mum and explain to her what her behavior was doing to him. And of course, this was also with the mindset of the 45-year-old Martin at the time, who was able to feed information back to 5-year-old Martin. Well, guess it gets worse, kid. You think you're having a hard time now. Wait till you get older, but done with love. And we were able to communicate this to her, and she was able to accept it and take it all on board. And then through, I think, what Kartika referred to as transpersonal therapy, which is what this is, right? I then hopped into my mum and was able to feel all of her shame, all of her pain, her suffering, everything that drove her to be the alcoholic that she was. You see, on the flip side, my mum was a teacher. She was a passionate, incredible teacher. She was a teacher for 35 years. Actually, 2 of the kids, well, they weren't kids anymore, they were women in their 40s, 50s, who she taught actually came to her funeral. And that's how popular she was as a teacher. So on the one side, you had this incredibly compassionate woman who was incredible with kids and trying her best, but on the other, you had this immensely miserable soul who every night would come home and drink 2 very, very large bottles of wine and cause mayhem for herself and everybody around her. And so it's a long answer. I'm a storyteller, so sorry, man. I had to tell you that story. It's a long answer to your question, but I don't think I could have had more of a profoundly beautiful lesson in empathy, where that one hypnotherapy session, and of course, after the result after this was we all had a hug. I gave little 5-year-old Martin a big hug, and I just told him to go and play. And that was so profound because he hadn't done that. Playing for him was so hard. He felt so isolated. He was too worried. And this kid just went off to play. And I obviously just burst out sobbing. And Kartika then brought me back, and it was a wonderful session. And afterwards I said, I wasn't healed, was I? She said, no, it turns out you still had a little bit of work to do. But that was a profound exercise, and I talk about that in the book. Actually, I tell that story in the book, and I would say to anyone who has experienced trauma, PTSD, you name it, even if you don't feel that you are carrying that trauma, the reality is you are, but even if you're not capable at where you're at in your life now, to see that all of these broken relationships are actually shared by one common denominator, you, then I would at least recommend let go of your expectations and trust a hypnotherapist and go through that process, because you will uncover things that have been suppressed and repressed that you have zero idea of. But that work was life-changing for me. So yeah, so I did that, and obviously came back with a boatload more love for my mum and for my dad, who's still alive, and it was very much a key part of my healing process.
And Marina and I can attest to that as well. Like we've seen such profound, quick, right? Just rip that Band-Aid off, because we need to find out how bad the wound is underneath. Like really, you could, so many people spend years and years and years and years in traditional therapy, and I'm not dissing traditional therapy, but if you want it to go quick, rip that Band-Aid off and expose what's there. You saw that little 5-year-old boy, right? That little boy that was sitting and watching his mom. And you, as a 45-year-old adult, were able, with hypnosis, to go and comfort him and reassure him and be the adult, right? To be that loving adult that he needed. And
It's a game changer.
Yeah. It is game changing. It really is. Like,
but I like your metaphor of the Band-Aid. I think that, and again, I don't criticize traditional therapy. I did traditional therapy for a year and a half. That was the first thing I did before I did any of this incredible stuff. And it certainly paved the way, but I had a great therapist. I sat down with this guy, a chap called Michael. And I said, Michael, this is only going to work if you explain the science to me, because I've realized I'm quite pragmatic. So if I tell you I'm thinking this or I'm doing that, then it would help if you just explain to me the probability of why that is. And so he did. Obviously, he did a lot of digging. And the newsflash, I went to see a therapist because I had all of these problems, but that were centered really around my behavior with women. No surprise, it turns out it was to do with my relationship with my mum. So he helped me uncover a lot of that, but he also helped me put in some practical utilities. So we talked about Burns transactional analysis, for example, a wonderful tool,
Yeah.
a simple model, which I talk about in the book. And he would talk about synaptic pathways and neurogenesis and how we can unlearn the things that we've learned, but there's a great deal of work that you must do to unlearn. And of course, how can you possibly unlearn anything if you don't think you're doing anything wrong in the first place? So there's a stage prior to that, which is self-realization, isn't it? So he helped me really see the beginnings of the anatomy of happy. Excuse me. So, and these are 2 stages within a multi-stage process that I've outlined in the book, which I'm suggesting. I'm not saying that you can't be happy if you don't do this work. I'm saying you can't have everlasting happiness, like truly profound, sustainable happiness without doing this work. And of course, the book also then dives into, well, what is happiness and what is it not? And what these things that we pursue, these things that we chase, things, there's a word, cars, houses, job titles, status, bank balance, stuff. So I talk about the pursuance of stuff rather a lot in the book, and how, speaking from first hand, having had a lot of stuff and driven supercars and been on phenomenal travels around the world in 7-star hotels and had all the stuff, I can tell you firsthand that that's not happiness. It's just more distraction. So yeah, I think the thing about the therapy is it's a wonderful practice to undergo, but it can take years. And for many people, and especially if you're with an average therapist, and let's face it, just like any profession, there are average people doing this work. It can take 5-10 years, and one wonders why, when there are so many other modalities available to us that mean you don't need to go to see a therapist for 5 to 10 years. I often wonder what therapists must think when they keep seeing these people for 10 years. And, you know, I don't know, maybe some people just think, well, it's a regular fee. And, you know, we know each other quite well. I like having them around my house. But if I were a therapist, I'd be saying, don't take this the wrong way, but I never want to see you again. I want to help you heal, and then I never want to see you again. So yeah, speaking of the Band-Aids, there are many Eastern practices which I talk about in the book, yoga and breath work being 2, that I also suggest we, as the wider world, ought to reevaluate alongside Eastern philosophies, because Eastern philosophies, for example, share a lot more in common with psychotherapy than many more draconian religious ideas, for example. So I'm trying to suggest to people that all of this ancient wisdom has been around for thousands of years. These breathwork practices have been around for thousands of years. Yogis, monks, masters have been doing these things for so long, yet we don't know about them. We don't. Why don't we know about them? Because all of these things can help us regulate our emotions, like that breathwork, for example. And of course, I talk about psychedelics in the book. If you wanted a Band-Aid ripping off to expose your trauma, but in the right setting with the right guide, I hasten to add, then psychedelics would certainly be something you ought to be considering working with. And of course, as we're seeing now, the renaissance is occurring for psychedelics in the psychotherapy world. And so we're going to see some huge advances going forward in utilizing psychedelics as part of a combined therapy process, I think. What about you guys? Have you done any work with psychedelics?
No.
No, I've studied hypnosis quite extensively. I'm actually busy with a second course, and we had a guest on a few months ago, Dr. Anwar, and I've learned so much from him, because if you do hypnosis right, you sometimes can get very close to exactly the same place as psychedelics without the exposure to the drugs. And I have, through hypnosis, I've gone to crazy places. And I think most of all is the part of the reason I've asked that question earlier is when I feel when you can ignite that fire of the higher self in a person, and if they can remember who they really are, who their essence is before they come into this body, and if they then and this I experience in hypnosis with my clients, if they then can turn around and now feel all that love, because it's all love, isn't it? And feel that love first for themselves, and then turn that love inward, and now, like putting glasses on, and now look through the soul. Look at those people who hurt you. What do you see now? And it is 100% every time 180-degree turn, because they cannot, the aha moments in that alone, and that concept of, okay, I had to come through this family to get the growth to where I am today. And I can write a book on just that, on the clients that had that aha moment in that moment, when you ignite that awareness of who they really are.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I don't disagree. I think there are the wonderful thing about the opportunities we have to heal here in Earth School is they are myriad. There are so many ways for us to heal from our human condition, from the human experience. And of course we're all different. So for some of us, it might just be meditation. For some of us, it might be meditation and hypnotherapy. For some of us, it might be yoga and some psychedelics, whatever. I fundamentally, I don't judge. I don't judge what anybody does, as long as they are doing it healthily and with a through the right lens. You utilize the word lens a moment ago. I think that's a good way to consider it. But no doubt about it, hypnotherapy and indeed, of course, meditation can show us how to rise above it, literally rise above it, rise to a higher seat of consciousness where we're able to see. I refer to it as the story, the Martin story, so I'm able to see the Martin story for what it is. It's a story. It's a busy tale going on down there. And actually, there's some drama over there. Well, I'm just going to observe that drama without judgment, because I'm not observing it as from the mind. I'm observing it from a higher seat of consciousness. And of course, as we do this practice, then we can observe the observer, which is where it gets quite interesting. So yeah, I'm 100% agree with you. There are so many ways for us to do it. The fundamental practice is, how do we step out of ourselves? How do we step out of the body and mind? What practices work for us? And then how do we bake that into some sort of a daily practice so that we can cope with life on Earth School? Because as you know, and obviously you're both therapists, we can do all this phenomenal work and have these breakthrough experiences, but then tomorrow we've got to step back in. We're going to step back into life, and then we're surrounded by lots of other people, the lion's share of which haven't done this work. They haven't had hypnotherapy. They haven't worked with psychedelics. They don't meditate. So, there's just monkeys everywhere smashing into each other. And we have to learn how to, A, avoid any more collisions with these monkeys, and B, try not to judge them for it. Try to see, I use the analogy of the iceberg all the time. We just see, this is what we see, the peak of
7%.
The tip of the iceberg. That's what we see of any person when we're walking down the street, isn't it? What's beneath the surface? Well, let's use Martin for an example, the Martin story. Actually, there were 45 years of trauma. There was an entire childhood of trauma and abuse. There was 2 decades of alcoholism, drug addiction, sex addiction, narcissism, self-harm, on a grand scale and the harm of others. If we were able to make this snapshot review of people, or if we were somehow able to access their database, their past database when we met them, of course we would all have more empathy. How could we not? And I suppose the trick is we don't have that information, but what we do know is that everyone on this planet has experienced either a big T or a little t. They've all experienced some kind of trauma, and they've all got something going on, and that's where so empathy becomes a huge part of the daily practice, I think.
There's so much I want to add. Sorry, Fran. The thing that came to me is that Wayne Dyer said, when the student is ready, the teacher will show up, and we all speak languages, and not everybody speaks my language. And then they read your book, and that's exactly what they need in that moment to grow. Sorry, Fran.
Yeah, thanks.
You were talking about where we need to understand that the 7% is not the 93, right? That there's so much that we don't know about people, humans, why they act the way they do, non-judgment, and all the rest of that. But you talk about the drama triangle in the book, and where there comes a point, right? There comes a point. So can you touch on the drama triangle, because it's important as well, the non-judgment and acceptance and all of the rest of that it's 93%, but I'm thinking that the drama triangle is the little bit on the top.
Yeah, I'm happy that you mentioned that. Well, absolutely. And the whole book is about non-judgment, about non-attachment, about ways to avoid suffering. And of course, newsflash, the less you suffer, the happier you are. Who knew? And of course, the book is the thread of the book is also love. It's all about love, and it's about learning how to love yourself as much as it is how to connect with and love others. However, if we're always walking around just being love for everyone, and as a result, of course, we're constantly bashing into all these monkeys misdriving their earth rovers who don't think the same way, and either consciously or unconsciously want to harm us or want to drain our energy, is probably a better way to put it. We must utilize boundaries, because if this is all about love, then we must remember self-love first and foremost. So we've got to come first here. As long as I mean healthy self-love, obviously, not narcissistic self-love. So I came across this wonderful model by a psychologist called Stephen Karpman. It's called Karpman's Drama Triangle, and it's so simple. It's genius. He actually trained under Eric Berne, who created the transactional analysis. So it's really it's an extension of the transactional analysis tools. And for people who don't know what the heck I'm talking about right now, essentially, these are just ways that we can transact with one another, or more likely interact with one another, and hopefully have a better outcome because we're approaching that interaction mindfully. But make no mistake about it, Karpman's Drama Triangle is for you first and foremost. It's to protect you. It's to draw boundaries. So the triangle is obviously 3 sides, and what Karpman is suggesting is that in any drama, we assume one of 3 roles. We're either the persecutor, the victim, or the rescuer. Now, if someone is creating drama, they are assuming one of those roles. A classic example, and I'm sure we all have someone in our life right now, is someone who every time you meet them, doesn't matter if you're on top of the world, you will say, "Hey, how's it going?" And they say, "Oh, no, the cat's sick. My girlfriend doesn't understand me. I missed the payment on this. I feel unfit. Blah 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 blah." Now, okay, so I'm not suggesting we immediately switch off our empathy, but the point is, when we mindfully observe what these people are doing and what they're saying, first thing, ask yourself, how many times have you had this conversation with them about these same dramas? And the likelihood is they'll be telling you about the same thing that they've been telling you about time and time again. And you'll have probably given them a great deal of advice. and support to try and help them to fix that issue. So what role have you assumed? The rescuer. So little did you realize you just hopped into the drama triangle to try and help this person. And you try to give them lots of meaningful advice. And you always feel drained when you've left this person or when you've had an interaction with this person. I can hear the bells of the listeners as they ring. And you're probably not too keen to go and hang out with this person again just immediately shortly thereafter. What happens is, when we jump into a drama triangle as the rescuer for a victim, at some point, everyone's role switches, says Cartman, and says real life if you think about it. So when I jump in as a rescuer to help this person, but then they continue to bring me down and bring themselves down with this story, then they might snap at me or they might turn on me. So then we've changed. Now they're the persecutor and I'm the victim. So now I'm in a triangular washing machine, which would be quite noisy, I imagine. Everyone bouncing off those three sides. And obviously, I could talk about this for a couple of podcasts, but there are lots of different examples of how these dynamics shift depending on how we step in as a victim or we step in as a persecutor. Ultimately, it's usually persecutor and victims that start a drama triangle. My point is that we need to be a lot more mindful of these relationships and the people with whom we interact. Are they actually assuming the role of one of the roles of the drama triangle? Are they trying to get me to step inside? Do I feel drained? Do I enjoy my friendship with this person? Is it one-sided? All of these questions. Write it down. Get a piece of paper. Draw some triangles. Draw some, write some people's names down. I guarantee there are 3 people in your life right now that are doing this in one way, shape, or form. One might be your husband, one might be your parent, one might be a child. Now, ultimately, my advice is you've got to give them some feedback and do it using Eric Berne's transactional analysis. So communicate like an adult. Don't patronize them and don't communicate in a childish way. But you've got to invite them to stop behaving like this. And that's what I mean by boundaries. So yes, ultimately we've got all of these wonderful opportunities to step outside of ego and to see our intrinsic connection to one another and to nature and to be and feel love. But at the same time, if we're allowing others to stick an invisible straw in the top of us and slurp all of our energy, well, there's no self-love there. And that is ultimately being a victim. So we're actually creating our own drama triangles. Did that make sense?
That's brilliant.
Dead on, accurate.
Well, absolutely. And it's said without judgment, of course. You appreciate the perspective, but we must get ready to have some sort of a system in place. And for me, it's the 3 strikes rule. If I feel as though I've stepped into your drama triangle 3 times and I've given you love and I've given you and I've heard you but I've also tried to identify with you that I understand that actually there's something behind this behavior. It's neuroses. There's some mental illness or some trauma behind this behavior, and you didn't want any of that advice. And actually, you turned on me. You might have even showed me your teeth. Then on the 3rd time, I'm out of here. There's nothing I can do for you. And as Ramdas once said, I'll paraphrase, but all I can do to help you is work on myself. And all you can do to help me is work on yourself. And that might sound quite a selfish, perhaps over pragmatic or logical thing to say, but actually it makes profound sense when you consider that if I take my broken mind away and broken heart away and I go and do some phenomenal work and then I come back and interact with you 2 like as we are right now, then you're getting a better version of me. You're feeling me at a different frequency. It's a frequency of love. So we're all sharing that right now in this wonderful circle, and hopefully anybody listening or watching is understands or at least senses what I'm talking about. so by doing that work on myself and then coming back to interact with you, I've done us all a favor. And obviously it's like pebbles in a pond, isn't it? You would like to think that there's going to be a ripple effect of that. And I suppose that's, I wrote this book because I had what I class as a near-death experience, but it was actually during a psilocybin session, and it wasn't a drug overdose. It was a full-on conversation with my higher self about the existence of ego and its futility. And in having this conversation, I was essentially invited to die, to ascend, the word, to cross over was the visual. And my life passed before my eyes, and all the stuff that people say happens when they have these near-death experiences. And I actually said, I'm really tempted, because I'm very excited about what's outside of this body. and frankly, I've learned a lot, and I'm so grateful to have learned all of these things. I feel like, I actually could go now, and I could go in a healthy way. But then I'm only in my mid-40s, and actually I've just learned all of these incredible things about myself and about everybody else. And I'm a communicator by trade. I'm a writer. I've been in the marketing business for 25 years. No, do you know what? I'm not going. I'm going to go back to Earth School, and I'm going to work out a way to articulate some of this stuff in a way that isn't about spirituality or one religion, or, my way or the highway, if you like. Just give people an idea of all of these things that they might be able to consider that would give them a happier life. So I did that. And then I wrote this book. And so I suppose you could say I found my purpose in all of these, in this incredible journey. And I realized that having spent the first half of the Martin story in service to self, I had this incredible opportunity to spend the second half of the story in service to others. And I can't think of a more meaningful way to be. And that's what I'm doing here, talking to you guys.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
Well, that was an amazing time, and I think we can carry on for another 3 hours just like this. So we may have to invite you back, Martin.
I would gladly come back. I apologize for talking so much.
Oh, no, it's fantastic. That's what we like. And so, How to Die Happy podcast and howtodiehappybook.com, howtodiehappypodcast.com, and then you're on Instagram under Martin O'Toole, as well as on Instagram, howtodiehappy_podcast.
That's right. You've got lots of things to find there. But ultimately, if you look for, Martin O'Toole or How to Die Happy, I'm ranking pretty well now on Google. And if you'd like to buy the book, you can find it on Amazon as a paperback, as you've seen, or as a Kindle or an EPUB, or audiobook. And you can get the audiobook on 45 platforms, and you can get the ebook on all the platforms as well. So yeah, I hope people enjoy it. And I hope I get more A-star pluses or A plus pluses. And I'd just like to say thank you to you both for having me come along and talk to you. Really
Martin, you were telling us before the show began about your partner, and how she contributed to the audible version. So can you tell our viewers about that too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So with the audiobook, it's I'd like to think it's a different audiobook, because often you're getting an audiobook which is written by a phenomenal author, but maybe you just don't resonate with the narrator, and the music's a little bit sort of an afterthought. And so I wanted to produce something that really did resonate with people properly. So first and foremost, I've narrated the book. So, but of course, if you don't enjoy listening to me talking now, then you're not going to want to listen to the book. But I figured I wrote it, excuse me, so I know exactly where I want the intonation and the inflection to happen. And I know where I want to speed up and where I want to slow down, and where I want to soften my voice, and where I want to be bombastic. So I narrated it, and then my partner Jules, who is a wonderful yoga teacher and meditation guide and a women's mentor, she narrates. I wrote some little breathwork sessions and meditations, and I shared some prayers like Buddhist prayers and Tibetan prayers, and she narrates them. She's got a wonderful voice. But then I also took a field recorder around Bali and around Indonesia on our many travels, and I recorded sounds from the rainforest at night or day, or the sound of the sea just lapping against the coastline on Gili Asahan Island at night. So you've got the cicadas, or dawn in a field in the middle of Bali where all you can hear is just bird song, mad bird song, or frogs and toads. So I've got all of these sounds. And since Bali was so fundamental to my healing journey, I wanted to inject a bit of Bali into this audiobook so that people could just, I suppose, feel on a more intrinsic level some of the experiences that I had to help me find peace.
It's lovely. It's beautiful. She's got such a nice voice, right? It's just really relaxing and calm and gentle. And yeah, so give her my regards.
Does she get an A+ too, or just
She gets a wonderful, but not as much as you.
So it's now A++ and A++.
Tell her she gets an A+. Brilliant. Well, I really appreciate you checking out the book in advance of our conversation as well. I think it helps when we have a more intrinsic idea of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
And thank you also for buying it, Marina.
You're very welcome. I will be listening to it starting maybe tonight. So thank you so much again for being here. And thank you everybody for tuning in. And we trust that you have received a lot of hope and food for thought tonight. So thank you again, Martin. Thank you, my friend, Fran.
Thank you.
Almost retired friend. So namaste. And
Namaste.
we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.